Before we begin tonight's episode, a brief warning. This show discusses historical events, political ideologies, and modern narratives that some may find uncomfortable. Our intent is not to provoke hatred or glorify violence, but to examine facts, timelines, and claims that are often oversimplified or misrepresented in public discourse. If you're looking for slogans, memes, or outrage bait, this may not be the episode for you. If you're willing to engage with history honestly, even when it challenges what you've been told, then stay with us.
If you spend more than 5 minutes online today, you've seen it. Republicans are Nazis. ICE is the Gestapo. Trump voters are the KKK with smartphones. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. Immigration, crime, speech, elections. Somehow it all circles back to the same lazy conclusion. The right equals fascism. Now, when you push back with actual history, slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, segregation, the Ku Klux Klan, opposition to civil rights, you don't get a rebuttal. You get an escape hatch. The party's switched. That sentence has become the most powerful narrative eraser in modern politics. It's invoked to wipe away over a century of documented history without requiring evidence, timelines, voting records, or institutional continuity. It's not an explanation. It's a moral reset button. Say it, and suddenly no one has to answer for anything that came before. Tonight, we're not playing meme tennis. We're not trading insults or calling everyone we disagree with a Nazi because that word actually means something. And cheapening it doesn't make you righteous, it makes you dishonest. Tonight, we're asking a simple but dangerous question. Did the parties actually switch, or did the labels change while the power structures stayed exactly where they were? Because if history really flipped the way people claim, then the institutions, the ideology, the voting patterns, and the cultural enforcement mechanisms should have flipped too. And if they didn't, then maybe what we're seeing today isn't fascism at all. Maybe it's narrative laundering. So let's bring in the panel, because this conversation deserves more than slogans. First up, Brian, bringing the heat, the receipts, and the zero patience tolerance for historical gaslighting. Brian's not here to play defense for a party. He's here to call out a lie that's been repeated so often people mistake it for fact. Next, Rachel, our independent voice in reality check. Rachel cuts through spin on both sides, and tonight she's here to separate legitimate historical nuance from outright narrative abuse, because acknowledging complexity doesn't mean surrendering truth. Then there's Daniel, connecting the dots others pretend don't exist. Daniel looks past party labels and into institutional continuity, media alignment, and why certain myths survive not because they're true, but because they're useful. And joining us as well, Skylar, bringing a progressive perspective that challenges us from the left, not with slogans, but with concerns about power, people, and consequences. Skylar's role tonight isn't to shout Nazi, but to engage with whether the language being used actually helps the causes it claims to defend. And I'm Artie, your host. I've watched history get flattened into memes, institutions escape accountability, and serious words lose all meaning. Tonight isn't about winning an argument. It's about restoring context in a culture that's forgotten how dangerous lies can be when they're repeated often enough. Because if everything you disagree with is fascism, then eventually nothing is. Let's start here, because this is where every one of these arguments eventually collapses. Anytime someone brings up slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, segregation, or the Ku Klux Klan, and points out correctly that Democrats were the dominant political force behind all of it, the response is instant and rehearsed. The parties switched. No dates, no votes, no explanation of how, when, or why. Just a sentence that supposedly wipes the slate clean. So Brian, I want to start with you. When someone says that to you, what are they actually saying?
What they're really saying is, I don't want to talk about history beyond the bumper sticker version I was taught. Because if the parties truly switched in the way people claim, you'd be able to point to a moment, an election, a platform flip, a mass exodus of voters, something concrete. But that doesn't exist. What does exist is a long, documented record where Democrats opposed civil rights legislation, defended segregation, enforced Jim Crow, and controlled the same urban political machines for decades before and after the so-called switch. Strom Thurmond gets brought up like he's some kind of mic drop, but he's one guy, not an institution, not a movement, not a voter base. Meanwhile, the same cities that enforced redlining and segregation in the 1930s are still run by the same party today, pushing the same top-down control, just with softer language. That's not a switch, that's a rebrand.
And that's the key word, rebrand. Rachel, this is where people accuse conversations like this of being dishonest because they say ideology shifted even if party names didn't. So how do you separate legitimate historical evolution from outright myth-making?
By demanding specifics instead of vibes? History isn't astrology. You don't get to just say things changed and walk away. Yes, political coalitions evolve. That's normal. But evolution doesn't mean inversion. What people refuse to confront is that the core philosophy didn't flip. The belief that the federal government should centrally manage society, engineer outcomes, and decide who qualifies for protection never went away. It just changed its justification. Before, it was separate but equal. Now it's equity. Different words, same assumption. That power should flow downward from institutions to individuals. And when you point that out, suddenly you're accused of defending racism instead of analyzing power. That's not an argument, that's a deflection.
Daniel, this is where the institutional angle comes in, because if the parties switched morally, then the institutions should have switched too. Media, academia, bureaucracy, culture. Did they?
Not even close. And that's the tell. The same institutions that defended segregation through expert consensus are now the ones declaring everything they dislike to be fascism. Universities didn't flip, bureaucracies didn't flip, media organizations didn't flip. What flipped was the story they tell about themselves. And here's the uncomfortable part. Calling Republicans Nazis isn't about history. It's about psychological control. If you label your opponent as morally untouchable, you never have to debate them. That's why ICE gets compared to the Gestapo, which is historically obscene. One enforced racial extermination policy. The other enforces immigration law passed by Congress. But the comparison sticks because it shuts down thought. That's not activism, that's conditioning.
Skylar, I want to bring you in here because from the progressive side, people will say this language comes from fear, that it's a response to perceived authoritarianism. But does calling everything Nazi actually help protect people, or does it cheapen the word?
It cheapens it. And I say that as someone who worries about government overreach. When you label every enforcement action or policy disagreement as fascism, you lose the ability to recognize real authoritarian behavior when it shows up. The problem is that fear has replaced precision. People are reacting emotionally instead of historically, and that leads to dangerous rhetoric. If ICE is the Gestapo, then what language do you have left when an actual human rights atrocity happens? You've spent it. I think a lot of people don't realize how dismissive that sounds to communities who actually suffered under real fascist regimes.
That's an important point, because words matter and history matters. And this is where resources like PragerU get people angry, not because they're fabricating history, but because they're forcing uncomfortable timelines back into the conversation. You don't have to agree with their politics to acknowledge that the historical record doesn't support the fairy tale version of the party switch that gets passed around online. And that's what we're really talking about tonight. Not defending one party, not demonizing another, but asking why one side gets to erase its past by simply declaring it belongs to someone else now. Because if history can be rewritten with a sentence, then accountability never exists at all. When we come back, we're going to dig into why this myth persists, who benefits from it, and why calling half the country Nazis has become the laziest political shortcut in modern discourse. And yes, there will be receipts. So if the party switch story doesn't hold up under scrutiny, if it collapses the moment you ask for timelines, voting records, or institutional movement, then the real question becomes why it's still repeated so confidently. Lies don't survive this long by accident. They survive because they serve a purpose. Daniel, let's start there. Who benefits from this myth staying alive?
Institutions benefit. Full stop. The party switch myth is one of the most effective accountability shields ever created because it allows the same power centers to claim moral innocence without ever relinquishing control. Think about it. If the Democratic Party can argue that all of its historical sins were magically transferred to Republicans, then universities don't have to explain their segregationist past. Legacy media doesn't have to explain its role in enforcing Jim Crow narratives, and federal bureaucracies don't have to explain why they expanded under the same ideological framework before and after the alleged switch. It's institutional absolution without repentance. And the moment you challenge that, you're not debating policy anymore. You're threatening legitimacy. That's why the response is emotional, not factual.
Brian, this is where the accusations usually escalate. The moment someone loses the historical argument, suddenly you're not just wrong, you're evil, Nazi, KKK, fascist. Why has that become the go-to move?
Because moral accusations are easier than defending a record. Look, if you can label your opponent as irredeemable, you don't have to explain your own failures. Calling Republicans Nazis isn't about World War II. It's about ending the conversation. And it's wildly ironic because the policies being defended today, speech control, centralized authority, selective enforcement, punishment for dissent, are far closer to authoritarianism than anything being criticized. The left wants total narrative control, and when they don't get it, they panic. That's why enforcement of immigration law becomes Gestapo, parental input at schools becomes fascism, and disagreeing with activists becomes violence. Words lose meaning, but power gets consolidated.
Rachel, this is where people accuse shows like ours of ignoring nuance. They'll bring up figures like Barry Goldwater or the Southern Strategy and say that proves the switch. How do you respond without oversimplifying it?
By pointing out that citing individual politicians isn't the same as proving a mass ideological transfer. Goldwater opposed parts of the Civil Rights Act on constitutional grounds, not because he supported segregation, and he lost badly because of it. That's not evidence of a party flip. That's evidence of a political disagreement. Meanwhile, the actual civil rights legislation that passed was driven and signed by Republicans. More importantly, the voters didn't migrate the way the myth suggests. Black Americans didn't suddenly gain power within the institutions that had oppressed them. Those institutions stayed intact. So when people invoke nuance selectively, it's usually to distract from the bigger picture, that systems of control remain stable, even as language softened.
Skylar, I want to end this segment with you because from the progressive side, there's often a genuine fear that history could repeat itself. But does constantly crying Nazi actually prevent that? Or does it blind people to real warning signs?
It blinds people. When everything is fascism, nothing is. If you're serious about preventing authoritarianism, you have to be precise, not hysterical. Real fascism isn't disagreement. It's the elimination of opposition, the fusion of state and ideology, and the punishment of dissent. When those words are used carelessly, they stop functioning as warnings and start functioning as weapons. And that's dangerous, because it trains people to react emotionally instead of critically. If your politics requires historical amnesia to survive, then it's not protecting democracy, it's hollowing it out.
And that's the bottom line. The party switch myth didn't survive because it was true. It survived because it was useful. Useful for institutions avoiding accountability. Useful for activists avoiding debate. Useful for anyone who wants to claim moral authority without doing the historical work to earn it. When you call half the country Nazis, you're not standing on the right side of history. You're proving you don't understand it.
Quick pause before we get to final thoughts. Because this show doesn't run on corporate talking points or media grants, it runs on you. If you want to support Data and Dissonance, the easiest way to do that is through our merch. We've got the full lineup: hoodies, hats, mugs, bumper stickers, totes, and of course our 3 signature coffee blends: High Lakes, Rock Creek, and Bitterroot, all roasted in the USA and built for people who actually think for themselves. No slogans yelling at strangers, no cringe politics, just clean designs, quality gear, and a brand that stands for asking hard questions without apologizing for it. Every purchase helps keep this show independent, unfiltered, and on the air. You can find everything through the links in the episode description, on our website, and across our socials. All right, back to it.
We've reached a point in our politics where words don't describe reality anymore. They're used to replace it. Nazi doesn't mean Nazi. Fascist doesn't mean fascist. Racist doesn't mean racist. They've become conversational weapons, deployed not to warn, but to silence. And once language stops being precise, accountability disappears right along with it. That's what this entire episode was really about. Not defending a party, not attacking a tribe, but asking why so many people are comfortable rewriting history instead of confronting it honestly. The party switch myth survives because it allows people to inherit moral superiority without doing the moral work. It lets institutions wash their hands of the past while keeping all the power they accumulated from it. It lets activists feel righteous while ignoring the uncomfortable fact that centralized control, narrative enforcement, and ideological conformity have always been the real danger, no matter which party's logo is stamped on it. History doesn't care about your feelings, and it doesn't bend to protect your politics. It records who passed the laws, who enforced them, and who benefited from them. Everything else is spin. What's most dangerous about casually calling your political opponents Nazis isn't that it's offensive, it's that it destroys your ability to recognize real evil when it shows up. If border enforcement is fascism, then what do you call actual ethnic cleansing? If disagreement is violence, then what language is left for tyranny? You don't prevent history from repeating by flattening it into memes. You prevent it by understanding exactly how it happened the first time and refusing to let power hide behind new slogans. And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. A free society requires disagreement. It requires uncomfortable conversations. It requires the humility to admit that your side is capable of being wrong, and that the people you disagree with are still human beings, not caricatures from a propaganda poster. The moment a society decides that half its population is beyond redemption is the moment it starts walking down a very dark road. So if tonight made you uncomfortable, good. That means you were listening. Because truth doesn't shout. It waits patiently for people willing to sit with it. And if you care about democracy, history, or actual justice, then you owe it to yourself to stop outsourcing your thinking to slogans and start demanding receipts. That's where we'll leave it tonight. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Tonight's episode is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series, political suspense novels that don't sanitize power or pretend institutions are always the good guys. If you like stories where truth is buried, narratives are manipulated, and one man refuses to play along, start with the Covenant Protocol, continue with the Prophet Directive, and keep an eye out for the upcoming third installment, Black Echo Rising. Available now on Amazon in ebook and paperback. Links are in the episode description. Read it before someone tells you what it's supposed to mean.